Testing, testing. Okay, so I am back doing another YouTube video on Latinx Publishing. I know that like X at the end of Latin is just kind of I don't know. Like a lot of individuals explain it differently, like why this is like a thing right now. It's more so kind of like positive in the sense that it's like bringing people together from different diverse Latin American backgrounds. But at the same time, a lot of people argue against it because it's like homogenizing. Anyways, I think I'm going off on a tangent. We're supposed to be talking about publishing. Anyways, hello everyone. I'm Danelli. I am super happy to be here with you today to talk a little bit about like one of my favorite topics right now, which is Latinos in publishing, Latino written books, and what is happening in the publishing industry right now. So, my interest in publishing has been growing for a really, really long time. I think I've wanted to be a writer since I can remember, and I've always been a writer. It's part of my like educational experience since I have a few degrees in English and can I say? I just love reading. I love literature. I love the way that it captures culture. And there's so much to learn because while people consider it, humanities, I actually think it's, you know, like art. And I also think it's a science in a way. Once you like have really mastered and learned how literature works for culture. Anyways, diversity within publishing has been like a huge topic of conversation for a very long time, especially in the United States. It is a huge topic of conversation because there is an enormous like Spanish speaking population in the United States that come from different parts of the world. And I'm not even going to say just Latin America because obviously there are other places around the globe that speak Spanish, including in Europe. So, like the influence of Spanish and Spanish literature and Spanish writers, Latin American writers within like the US publishing industry, which let's face it, pretty much like controls and leads publishing industries globally, is a hot topic right now because there's a huge lack of diversity. I do want to say, like, I've come across so many great academics talking about publishing in relation to diversity over the years, from Arlene Davila, who dissects the marketing of Latino artists, to Anamik Saha and Sandra Van Lent. They are, I believe, if they're not like American, they might also have like Middle Eastern backgrounds. Don't quote me on that, but they do talk about like the ambivalent nature of racial capitalism in publishing. To Renee Berglund, who highlights that the structures in place are aimed at preserving the hegemonic national imaginary or imagination. So, a lot of these writers have really influenced the way that I look at diversity in publishing. In other words, marketing has created an image of what it means to be Latin American or Latino or Latina or any other kind of BIPOC race for that matter. Racial capitalism uses diversity to its benefit to avoid the negative press that outright racism would provoke. So essentially, you have like a part of capitalism in like the United States is really fueled by racism. And it uses diversity as a gimmick to sell you literature, to sell you books, while the structure in place is still run by primarily an Anglo population and doesn't necessarily benefit like the average Hispanic or Spanish speaking reader. Meanwhile, the structures in place continuously work to stay in place. So there is no real advancement in diversity or diverse representation, let alone financial disparity. One way of keeping the status quo in place is by controlling the narratives around race, abilities along racial lines, or the appropriation of stories in some seemingly innocuous way or another. I talk a lot about this in quite a lot of my different research topics in academia. So again, keeping the status quo in place is by controlling the narrative around race. So like lip service is given to diversity in publishing, like in so many other industries, film and media, for example, to sort of like sell the idea of diversity. Like this product is diverse and diverse for so many different cultures, but then, you know, the structures in place for business, for that industry, don't really change in terms of like who they're hiring, who's leading, who's creating these sort of marketing plans. At the same time, when something fails or is not successful commercially, we blame it on racism, right? We blame it on race, i.e., the race, like it's just not sellable. Like we just can't sell things to this race, or this race is just not commercially viable. And this is particularly true when it comes to like literature written by Latin American artists or of Latino Hispanic descent. If they're not commercially viable, it's not our fault. They're just not good writers, for example. And at the same time, there is a subtle way of like appropriating stories that are commercially viable in seemingly innocuous ways or another, and like basically making them white, right? Like selling them to the white audiences, like rebrand, repatent, and like resell. And we see this with like myth stories that are used to create horror films, or that are used to create horror novels, or major like traditions that are like rebranded, resold. I want to point out that like some of the literature, for example, like Stephen King uses a lot of Native American literature, Native American lore and stories, and then like rebrands them behind this sort of like American ideal American town like horror story. Another example that I want to use is like the Day of the Dead story behind Coco, and the way that that story got totally like rebranded for Disney. And it worked, right? I actually really love Coco. It's a beautiful story. But at the same time, that is an example of the way that like a story is subtly appropriated for the benefit of like an American company. These details just highlight the work that needs to be done to create meaningful change in the industry. And this is all separate to the dangerous mergers that made headlines not too long ago. So, all of this is happening in an industry that is essentially very competitive. And there is a lot of like competitiveness between the major companies and like smaller companies attempting to create a market for actually like actual diverse writers, which is incredibly dangerous because it's leaning more towards like a monopoly. At the same time, there are different moving parts in the publishing industry. It isn't just about like, getting the right spot to the piece of literature, editing it right, and that's how it like comes out into the world. Now there's actually like a structure behind the printing of a piece of literature. And a lot of those smaller companies that are essentially have contracts with the bigger publishing companies worldwide are also under a lot of stress and strain. Some of the main questions of this video are like, why aren't there more mainstream Latinas and Latinos in publishing? Much like with film, it's a marketing problem. It's not that there are no good Latino or Latina writers or filmmakers or creatives. It's that the problem is intentionally circular. Okay. So Latina or Latino writers are often evaluated as having less commercial value. Therefore, publishers or companies invest less in marketing, which then leads to lower sales as opposed to their white counterparts. And their lack of commercial success because of this is then used to further feed the narrative that there are just no good Latino or Latina writers out there, or only a very small pool of good ones. So, this kind of lets you know what the real like questions when it comes to marketing for publishing really are. Like, how do they do marketing that is attracting the average Latin American buyer? They're not doing it very well. Especially this is especially true in publishing. We see and we're seeing a little bit more success in film and media, but publishing is actually falling behind. They are investing less in Latino or Latino writers. And because they are investing less in marketing, it kind of has a circular effect, right? Like, not enough people know or see that there is like a book up for sale. And so when it actually matters, like the commercial success matters, there it isn't there, right? Because we don't know that it's the books are out there. So again, like this is something that we need to start highlighting because it works very different for non-Latin American writers. So, because mainstream publishing is plagued with trouble in gatekeeping, self-publishing is becoming increasingly popular. However, writers that self-publish will frequently find that marketing is a significant roadblock in commercial success. First, it's an incredible financial risk to take. Second, it's an entirely different role than that of writer. So, a couple things here that I want to highlight. A lot of individuals are choosing to self-publish, because they're tired of waiting for the door to open, the opportunity to open. They're tired of waiting for, someone in an office to find value in their story and be able to sell it to the, like mainstream market. They're tired of like having their story go from publisher to publisher and getting rejection after rejection. And they want to hedge their bets on going on their own into self-publishing. That is a very like valid road to take. Because there is a lot of gatekeeping. There is usually a lot of networking involved, like to be able to even get an opportunity to meet with some of these companies and some of these editors and publishers, let alone like go all the way through to having it released at a Barnes and Noble, for example. So yeah, self-publishing is becoming an option, and an option that I think is being demystified as we go, but also destigmatized, right? Because maybe 10, 15 years ago, if you self-published as a Latino writer, it was like, oh, yeah, you didn't make it in mainstream publishing. So of course, like it was considered a point of shame for a lot of writers, but it's not that anymore. And it's becoming increasingly popular. At the same time, this is becoming more popular, not just because of the publishing industry itself, but for the sake of creativity. for the sake of having the work speak for itself, even when it's not backed up by a big company. And so that the writer has an opportunity to put the work out there, build their like portfolio as a writer, and increase the chances that maybe someday someone will notice their work and pick them up and represent them. So, that's like might add some clarity to a little bit of this like issue with self-publishing. The thing is though that, with self-publishing, marketing is still a roadblock. At a big publishing house, the likelihood that you're going to get like a big marketing budget is very small. You're going to find the same issue with self-publishing. Like it is what it is, right? But if this is an issue, it's something to like be realistic about that a lot of like independent writers find it very hard to find financial backing for an independently published book from either banks or like loan companies or whoever, because they don't know that the marketing is going to be successful, right? And it's very tenuous for like a lot of individuals to support an independent publisher, an independent like book, if the marketing plan is not like 100%, it's not going to 100% give a return. So there's that issue. And that has a lot to do with like the creativity behind marketing, like who's been creating these marketing plans and like are they reaching the like people who have the money to pay for the book? And is it reaching them in a way that's like appealing? And those are big questions, right, around Latino marketing. So it is a huge financial risk, especially when the like independent publisher or the independent like writer is taking like some of that risk on their own. And so that could be an issue for them. Lastly, I do want to say, that like self-publishing and getting into the world of self-publishing is tricky. There's a lot of moving parts, just as many moving parts, as there is in a big publishing company. You're going to find the same thing in a smaller company or going the self-publishing route. And that is a role that's like completely separate and different from being a writer, which a lot of creatives, coaches, executives would say, like, if you're a writer, emphasize on being a writer, like, focus on being a writer. Like, trying to learn how to essentially run your like publishing journey like an entrepreneurial business could distract you from producing some of your best work. And like that is not the goal of self-publishing often. The goal is to produce your best writing and to like bring it out into the world no matter what. So, if it doesn't necessarily always bring in commercial success, at the very least have a book published that is some of your best work. Because at the end of the day, even if it's not good in 2009, you never know when it's going to go viral if the right person picks it up. But the work has to speak for itself in 2025. If it gets picked up by someone that has the ability to like help you get a better readership or get a stronger readership or create a marketing plan or whatever it is, right? So this is something to like really think about when you're thinking about self-publishing and how it works. Suffice to say, like a person cannot just like upload a book onto Amazon and expect overnight success. This is a little bit of like myth busting that I've had to do over the years a few times. when individuals overly emphasize that you need to publish, you need to publish. I would recommend it if you are a fictional writer, an independent writer of any kind. It is always a great journey to go on as a beginning writer so that you understand the process and how it works and that you kind of scale your experience little by little. But, it's not as easy as like uploading the book onto Amazon. That's not going to guarantee that it's going to be read. It's not going to guarantee that like the book is going to sell itself. So having that like information very much at the center of your mind, like when you're going through this process or you're considering this process, is super important. That's not to like burst anybody's like bubble of enthusiasm, but it is something to keep in mind. This video can give you like a few practical tips on self-publishing or like alternative publishing routes. The bottom line, don't worry about writing. Worry about writing if you are a writer. Sorry. I have a little bit of generalized anxiety, so sometimes I like trip on my words. Not sometimes, like it's a problem that I work on. Produce a readable draft. Hone your craft to the best of your ability. So, bottom line, if you're a writer, worry about writing. Self-publishing is for the writers that have tried mainstream publishing, it didn't work, you don't have the patience for it, and you just want to get the work out there and build like a portfolio through time. But bottom line, make sure that what you release into the world is reader worthy, right? That it speaks for itself. So hone your craft to the best of your ability. I have been a lifelong reader. Believe me when I say that there are many commercially successful books that are an example of mediocre writing. And I'm sure that the average person or the person that is a big reader can list more than a few that are mediocre, like writing examples. Nonetheless, they were commercially successful because the story itself was okay and it found its readership. It found its audience. So I just want to bring that out as a perspective to consider. There are many books by big company publishers that are far from being considered high literature. So the method of publishing is not really a judgment on your writing. That being said, if you are passionate about it, hone your craft. Again, this is to sort of like destigmatize self-publishing because I think up until a few years ago, it was like, ooh, like a big no-no, like don't go that route. It'll hurt your reputation if you're in academia, like that's not legitimate. That's not a legitimate way of like, saying you're a published writer. I'm here to tell you, like, don't be afraid to share your work at all. There's nothing wrong with it, and just putting it out is good enough. Find a way that works for you, one that makes you proud, and one that you have mentally detached from financial success. Because, like I've just explained, for a while now, it being published by a mainstream like publishing company doesn't guarantee you anything. You're going to come across the same marketing issues. Many writers never found commercial success while alive, but they were rediscovered later in history and became some of the most lauded literary classics and some of the most lauded, academic classics for that matter. There is a lot of like archival rediscovery that's happening right now where books were archived and scholars are going back to rediscover those works and like bring them to light. The biggest issue here is like the lack of confidence. It's the number one killer of dreams. So practice putting yourself out there as a writer. It is a very, very, very solitary activity. So like a lot of writers like myself, probably feel very nervous doing speaking gigs, like speaking to people about their work. Other writers are pretty good with like answering questions and like getting out there and like selling their work. But like try to build some confidence around your work. It is lack of confidence is the number one killer of dreams. And again, like have confidence that your story is going to appeal to someone. Someone out there is going to read it and like it. So yeah, like practice putting yourself out there, putting your work out there. It's great because at the end of the day, I will say one of the things that I've noticed is that even big publishing companies will look at the author as like an individual that they may or may not want to support, whether they are marketable or not as an individual, as a celebrity, right? And so if they feel like, oh, I can't work with this person, like this person just doesn't have like commercial appeal, it's not so much the writing, it's just the writer, right? So putting yourself out there and practicing the skill of like exposing yourself to a readership is key, right? And again, I'm talking about like what you can work on like to scale, right? And like sort of like practice your skills in for the future. So neither traditional publishing or self-publishing or a structure somewhere in between is a direct or easy route to cultural or financial success. However, you should take control of your publishing journey. Listen, again, I cannot emphasize enough why detaching yourself from financial success is super, super important because um whether you're Latina, Black, some other BIPOC like community, it might just not work out. And it has a lot to do with the way that marketing for minorities is often hit and miss. Even people with a lot of experience that are in marketing that have created some of the best like commercials and like trends find it very hard. The reason why is because there is a habit of trying to create like a pan identity of like a homogeneous like identity for all Latinos. And the unfortunate truth is that's going to be a hit and miss because there's so much diversity in Latin America that you just never know like if it's going to work or not. And this is true for like a big publishing house that may want to invest a like conservative budget in marketing versus like a small publishing company that has zero money for marketing. It's like it's not a straight path to financial success. But I will say this, practice taking control of your publishing journey, whether you're working with a larger publishing company or a smaller one. It's important to like really refine your voice on who you are as a writer and like what you want your writing to represent, who you like envision as your ideal readership, and essentially like how you want the process to work for you. So a lot of times you're going to notice that some of these like big important companies, for example, might have execs, publishers, editors, marketers with like very like strong personalities and ideas on how something should go. If you have your vision of something, make sure it's heard because that's super, super important. Ask yourself, like, do you want a professional website? Do you want to have a social media presence? What kind of networking would you like to engage in? When and how? What vision do you have for the ideal form or method of marketing? What image do you want others to have? What is your personal brand? So, all of these are questions that you should be asking yourself. Maybe take a notebook and jot some ideas down. There's nothing wrong with like brainstorming some of your points of like your point of view on some of these things, right? And like your answer to some of these questions. Do you even care that you have a website? And if you create a website, like what is it going to be for? What are you open to like showing the world about yourself? Are you interested in receiving contact from people, whether in the industry or maybe other industries for collaborations? Is there going to be a place where you display other types of writing that you've done, etc.? Do you want to have a social media presence? A lot of people in the like early 2000s were saying like you got to get a Facebook, then you got to get an Instagram, then you had to get a TikTok and X and whatever. Like unless if you did not have a social media presence at a certain point, like it people thought like you were just not gonna make it as any kind of entrepreneur or like professional in any field. Right now, we're getting a little bit of like a group of like individuals that are kind of like moving against that. And are saying like it's not really necessary, like social media is not necessary. The work needs to speak for itself. And I kind of agree, like sometimes less is more. So really consider whether you want to even be on social media at all and how you want to engage with a public, if that's something that you're open to. What kind of networking would you like to engage in, when, and how? Listen, like some people make it like big very quickly, but they kind of spiral out and have like mental breakdowns. They experience burnout because they don't know how to filter their interactions with like third parties. And I mean professionals in other fields and fans, et cetera, et cetera. They also don't know how to network with people they actually have interest in working in, like working with in certain industries, and that like necessarily is not the most productive thing like for them. So again, like what kind of networking do you want to do, engage in, when, and how? It is, it would be counterproductive for you to network with radio shows if you ideally want to like have your book turned into a film, right? You never know, it might work. But again, like if you've got people that you're meeting from all industries, selecting kind of your focus might be more beneficial for you in the long run. What vision do you have for the ideal form or method of marketing? Listen, this is like very contentious because a lot of times, if you're working with some like marketers that have a very strong idea of like what is the ideal Latin look, you might be pressured into like agreeing to a certain marketing plan that like is not your thing and is not your style. And I'm all for like pushing back a little bit on that. If you have like a different style of doing things and like you know that like bright colors are not your thing and you resist that, that becomes the branding for your work, for your art piece, for your movie, whatever it is, like speak up and say something, right? Like, what is your vision of marketing? Because ultimately, if you don't speak up, you might get known for something you don't like, right? You might end up developing a reputation for something that you don't necessarily like, and it might not be to your benefit in the long run. So that is super, super important. I can tell you this, like if the person is a super comedic, funny individual, like why would you market them as like someone super serious? Like, no, that's not their personality, right? Like, you want to keep it light, you want to keep it bright, you want to keep it like moving. If a person is like naturally sweeter and like calmer disposition, like, why would you market them as like this hilarious person, right? Like, no, it has to kind of match a vision of who you are, like where you want to go in your life. And like speaking up about that is super important. So, like, cultivating a personal brand goes into that. Again, can't emphasize enough. Like, cultivate your craft to build yourself a professional profile as a writer, right? If you're into publishing, because ultimately, that is the most important thing. Like, if you're into writing and you want to go into publishing, that is the most important thing. Tell people, show people, become known for your talent, shine through your skills. This is really tough. There's a lot of great artists out there that continue to do their work as a hobby and never transitioned into doing it for a living because they kept it so private, right? Like they were very afraid to share their work and didn't develop resilience around receiving criticism, for example. And so sometimes feedback is important, but letting go of like the meaning of criticism, like how much it means to you, is super important. Like you wanna remember that. If writing is what you want to do, develop a profile for writing, right? Like around writing. Up over my words. Okay. Publishing is an extremely challenging journey for BIPOC people. I'm sure this video has like pointed out quite a few areas that like kind of prove this, right? For a lot of reasons, it's very, very challenging. So be prepared for some emotional ups and downs. I cannot emphasize how many like interviews I've watched or read from writers, directors, actors, producers, publishers, whatever, individuals in like certain fields that were not prepared for the emotional ups and downs that like their creative journey would take them on. It's super important to like expect that this is going to be the case. And don't be afraid to engage in some shameless self promotion. If this video is not like shameless self promotion, I don't know what is, honestly. Sometimes you just have to take the risk and put yourself out there, even if like your speaking skills are not the greatest, even if you stutter, even if you like get so nervous that like you lose track of what you were saying and you go off on tangents. Even if your appearance maybe like makes you self-conscious, like practice practice the art of shameless self-promotion. Like I've said, like marketing is not just about the plan that someone else creates for you or like this sort of like reputation someone else builds for you. It is like your personal brand, right? And like if you take control of that by engaging in some shameless self-promotion, it's going to build your confidence in your work and like how you approach the entire process. So, like, though you might begin your journey as a self-published writer, you may eventually find yourself a team of great agents, managers, or other creatives that want to collaborate with you. If it really matters to you, persistence is key. So, again, like, I think I've noticed some of the more popular writers today were not the most popular 5, 10 years ago, even within like the Latin American published writers in the United States or in the North American continent. They took a while to build a readership. They took a while to become known, but they were very, very persistent. And some of them like started at small publishing houses, independent publishing, and eventually got picked up by like bigger teams and like better agents, etc. And they built a team around themselves that like allowed them and gave them the opportunity to achieve greater success. So again, to like burst the stigma a little bit around self-publishing, like it's just where you're beginning sometimes. A lot of individuals choose to go through self-publishing when they already have had a lot of commercial success because they, have learned that having more control over the entire process is something they really enjoy. And they've known the ins and out of how to like market themselves. And they built in a unit for publishing in their companies. So the journey is not like taking an alternate route is not something you should be like embarrassed or ashamed about at all. But if it matters to you to produce the work, your persistence is key. It's just making sure that you're open-minded about how to approach publishing. I can add so much about networking. Going to writing events, joining writing groups, and attending book fairs. Yeah, I can add so much. All in all, like immerse yourself in the world of publishing in one way or another. Keep track of the latest book sellers, the books with the best reviews, learn more about the industry's ins and outs, work your way through your reading list slowly but surely. In short, get yourself on the map and stay on the map. There is no right or wrong path to take, just stay on the path. I cannot emphasize this enough. Go about networking in a way that works best for you and is the healthiest for you. Some people really love to be around other writers. They find it really motivating. They get inspired. Other people surprisingly find it very draining. And it like puts out their writer fire, so to speak, because they get very self-conscious that other people's writing might actually be better. And they don't want to be thinking about that. So they prefer to network with other kinds of artists. That's all valid, by the way, and no shame in that because it happens to people in all different kinds of artistic industries. So go about networking in a way that like benefits you, your health, and your creativity. I will say though that I've heard at least a couple times that writers don't like to talk to other writers or go to certain events because they're afraid of being accused that their writing was taken from someone else's ideas for different other books. So they prefer to avoid certain events, certain people, certain groups because they like to work in isolation so that they can protect the copyright to their work. I also will add that a lot of writers prefer to publish a book first before like creating a script for something because they also want to protect the copyright and the IP for that story. So keep that in mind. Like all in all though, immerse yourself in the world of writing. And writing happens for so many industries. And I mean so many industries from law to like the horror genre to like medical books to history books to like all kinds of other fiction genres, etc., etc. Immerse yourself in something related to writing or publishing, one way or another. Keep track of like books that are maybe like the big sellers, but maybe books that like are super key for a particular industry, like that marked a turning point in that genre or industry or whatever it is. That helps with networking, number one. It also helps like to know what's working in the market. right? To know what's like what people are interested in reading. Also have like any good writer is always reading. Have like a reading list for yourself and work through a reading list because um like writing is a creative activity. So if you lose like the well of creativity is diminished, that could have an effect on your writing ability. So reading is always a great way of like adding without feeling like it's like a stressful activity for you. There is no right or wrong path to take. Just choose a path and stick to it. Like I said earlier, like if you want to really sit down and jot notes on some of these things for yourself and stick to that plan, that's a great idea, something to consider. Finally, if you are interested in Latinos and publishing, read more books by Latinos or Latinas. Read the favorites, Paulo Coelho, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jorge Luis Borges, etc., etc. Or academics like Gloria Saldúa, Sherry Moraga. Read some of the newer writers like Rios de la Luz or Ariana Brown. I will say that like um if you want to like really network with Latino writers and like become part of that group or other BIPOC community of writers, learn who's out there doing the same work that you are. And I mean by the same work, I don't mean like writing the same book. I mean putting themselves out there, networking with each other, getting influenced by each other in terms of like point of view, ethics, etc. Learn who's on the same like vulnerable journey to becoming a published writer that you're on. It's really important and it's great to build a community around like the same goals, right? Or similar goals. I myself have work to do in this area. It is super important to make the effort to know who's out there right now. The more exposure we get to the field and the more exposure we give to these writers, the more we can show the industry gatekeepers that we are savvy and aware consumers that know what we want and what we like, and that there are plenty of great Latino or Latina writers out there that are capable of commercial success. That is it for now. That is like the primary like thing that I wanted to highlight at the end is like make sure you're paying it forward also because it does the community a huge disservice to engage in like gatekeeping even within like the Latino community. I think that has plagued a lot of writers in publishing for a very long time. Either like editors that made it to the top and in big publishing houses not paying it forward, or, like assistants doing the same, or agents doing the same, et cetera, et cetera. That like really hinders like collective progress. So pay it forward in one way or another, because I think that's something that has held the community behind, like back. And it all has to do with like picking up on like gatekeeping trends that benefit the structures in place. If you're not benefiting as a Latino or a Latino writer, or anyone that works in the like publishing industry as it is, why engage in it further, right? You want to break away from that and like start to build a different kind of way of working in publishing. So again, like that's it for now. I know this is probably like a pretty lengthy video, and maybe there are going to be people out there that have even more questions on how like publishing works exactly. There are, like I said, a lot of moving parts, and we can get into some more details, but that might have to be for a different video. At the same time, like if you guys like have comments, questions, concerns, don't be afraid to like make a comment or send a message or whatever the option YouTube gives us. But for now, like thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video illuminating, helpful, that you enjoyed some of the information that I like provided, that it may have been validating for you to hear some of this regarding like how tough it is in the publishing industry. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this, and please don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe, and stick around for the next video because I think we're going to keep talking about these subjects from different point of views and, tackling specifics in the future. So, yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.